Two friends. Same job title. Same company. Same salary, almost to the dollar. $71,000 and $72,400. They started within 4 months of each other back in 2019. Same apartment complex for the first 2 years. Same Friday happy hour. If you'd looked at their pay stubs side by side, you would have said these two people were living identical financial lives. 7 years later, one of them has $61,000 sitting across a brokerage account, a retirement account, and a savings account that's never dipped below 4 figures. The other one has $2,300 in checking, no retirement balance to speak of beyond whatever the company automatically put in and forgot about, and a credit card that carries a balance more months than it doesn't. Same raises. Same bonuses, give or take. Neither of them inherited anything. Neither of them had some catastrophic medical bill or a divorce that wiped them out. I want to be really clear about that because when people hear a gap like this, they assume there's a hidden variable, a rich uncle, a spouse who earns more, something. There isn't. I've seen this exact split play out enough times now, with enough different pairs of people, that I stopped looking for the hidden variable a long time ago. There isn't one. The entire gap comes down to a decision that takes about 4 minutes to make, and that only one of them ever made. It's not a budget, it's not a spreadsheet, it's not willpower, and it's not that one of them makes better decisions in the moment when they're standing at a cash register deciding whether to buy something. It's about what happens to the money before either of them is standing at that register at all. Before I get into exactly what that decision is, if you're new to this channel, hit subscribe. I break down the specific habits that separate people who build wealth quietly from people who just work hard and hope, and I do it every week. Here's why I want you specifically to sit with this one, if you're anywhere between your 30s and your 50s. This is the window where the gap either closes or becomes permanent. In your 20s, the amounts are small enough that even a bad habit doesn't cost you much. You don't have much to lose yet. Past your mid-50s, you're mostly managing what you've already built, for better or worse. But right now, in these 2 decades, you're earning the most you ever have. You're carrying the most financial responsibility you ever have. A mortgage, kids, aging parents starting to need help. And every dollar that moves through your hands in the wrong order gets absorbed by something. A bigger house, a better car, private school. None of it feels like waste in the moment. It just quietly eats the exact years where compounding would have done the most work for you. Think about how your own paycheck actually moves right now, today, this week. It lands. The mortgage or rent comes out a few days later. Groceries, gas, the kids' soccer fees, the streaming subscriptions you keep meaning to cancel, all draw from the same pool, in whatever order the bills happen to hit. Whatever's left over at the end of that gauntlet is what you consider savings, if there's anything left at all. That's backwards, and I don't say that to make anyone feel bad about it. It's backwards because almost every one of us was taught to budget exactly this way. Spend first. Save whatever survives, without anyone ever sitting us down and explaining that the order itself is the entire game. So let me tell you what the first friend, I'll call her Priya because that's not her real name, actually does on Payday, and why it's different from what almost everyone thinks paying yourself first means. Most people who've heard the phrase, pay yourself first, think it means this. Paycheck lands in checking, and then, on the same day or maybe a day later, an automatic transfer pulls some of it out into savings. That's the version nearly every finance article tells you to set up. And it's fine. It's better than nothing. But it has a flaw that almost nobody talks about, and the flaw is psychological, not mathematical. The flaw is this: you still saw the whole number. For one day, sometimes just a few hours, your checking account balance showed the full paycheck. Your brain registered that number as what I have. Then a chunk of it left. And even though the transfer happened automatically, something in the way we're wired treats that departure differently than money that was simply never there in the first place. Behavioral economists have a name for this: mental accounting. The idea that we treat money differently depending on which mental bucket we've assigned it to, even though a dollar is a dollar no matter where it sits. If your brain briefly filed that whole paycheck under spendable, the transfer out feels like a loss, even a small one, and small felt losses are exactly the kind of thing that make people quietly reroute money back toward themselves later in the month. A for emergencies only withdrawal that turns out to be for a concert ticket. That's not weakness. That's just how the wiring works when you give it the chance. What Priya does is different in one specific way, and it's the whole point of this video. Her money never lands in her checking account whole. She went into her HR portal, the same one where you update your address or your tax withholding, and she split her direct deposit itself. Not a transfer that happens after payday, a split that happens at the source, before the deposit is even one single event. A fixed percentage of every paycheck routes straight into a separate account at a completely different bank, one she doesn't have a debit card for, before the rest of it ever touches the checking account she spends from. By the time she opens her banking app on payday morning, the number she's looking at was never the full number to begin with. There's no ghost of a bigger figure in her memory to chase. There's no sense of loss, because nothing left. It simply never arrived there. That's the first transfer. Not a transfer at all, really. A redirection, before touch. I want to give you the exact mechanics of why the order matters this much, because before you touch it sounds like a nice phrase, and I don't want to leave it as a nice phrase. When money hits your checking account, you have already, psychologically, taken possession of it. Every purchase after that point feels like spending your own established balance. When money is diverted before it lands, you never take possession of that portion in the first place. So spending it isn't even a live option your brain considers. It's not sitting there tempting you every time you check your balance. Richard Thaler and Shlomi Benartzi built an entire retirement program around exactly this insight back in the early 2000s, called Save More Tomorrow. The core idea was brutally simple. Instead of asking people to cut their current paycheck to save more, which almost nobody agrees to, they had people commit today to a future raise being partly redirected into savings automatically, before that money ever became theirs, in a psychological sense. Participation and savings rates in the programs that use this design went up dramatically, not because people got smarter or more disciplined, but because the design stopped relying on discipline in the moment at all. That's the whole trick. You are not more disciplined than the other version of yourself who's standing at checkout deciding whether to buy something. You're just never put in that position with the same dollars. Now let's talk about the second friend, the one with $2,300 in checking after 7 years, because his story matters more than Priya's does, and here's why. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't buying things he couldn't afford on purpose. Marcus, I'll call him, actually did set up an automatic transfer. $50 a week, moved from checking to savings every Monday morning, 3 days after payday. On paper, that's more than $4,000 a year of saving. Except it almost never stayed saved. Marcus told me, and I've heard some version of this from more people than I can count, that by the third week of most months, he'd look at his savings balance building up and think, well, it's right there. I'll just borrow from myself and put it back next paycheck. He always meant to put it back. Most months he genuinely intended to. But the next paycheck had its own pressures, and the transfer back rarely happened, and the cycle reset. Over 7 years, that friction-free savings account, the one that was only ever one tap away in the same banking app, functioned less like a vault and more like a second checking account with better manners. Picture the actual moment this happens, because it's rarely dramatic. It's a Tuesday evening. Marcus is standing in a parking lot, and a friend just texted about concert tickets, $70 for a show he genuinely wants to see. He opens his banking app to check checking, sees $340, and right there, one tab over, sees savings sitting at $612. The mental math takes about 2 seconds. He's not choosing to be irresponsible. He's making what feels, in that exact moment like a completely reasonable trade-off. A little fun now, a promise to himself to put it back on Friday. Multiply that single parking lot decision by every small temptation across a year. Birthday gifts, a slightly nicer dinner out, a sale that's about to end, and you get exactly the pattern that leaves someone with $2,300 after 7 years of technically automated saving. The account did its job. The architecture around the account didn't. If you're watching this and that story sounds uncomfortably familiar, comment below and tell me how many savings accounts you've opened and quietly drained back into checking over the years. I read every one of these, and I promise you're not the only person who's done this 2 or 3 times. Here's the number that made this click for me the first time I really sat with it. As of this year, close to half of Americans say they're having difficulty covering their monthly expenses, and the personal savings rate nationally has been sitting near 4%, a fraction of what it was even a few years back. Almost a third of people carry more credit card debt than they have in savings at all. None of that is because people don't understand that saving matters. Everyone understands that saving matters. It's because the architecture of transfer it after it lands, then hope you leave it alone, is fighting against basic human wiring every single month. And basic human wiring wins more often than any of us would like to admit. So here's the order that actually protects you, and I want to walk through it precisely, because the sequence itself is doing real work, not just the fact that money moves automatically. The first stop, before anything else, is your employer match, if you have one. I want to be very direct about this because I see people skip straight to an emergency fund and leave this one behind. And it's the single most expensive mistake in this entire list. If your company matches retirement contributions, that match is not a bonus. It's not a nice to have. It is compensation you have already earned and simply haven't collected yet. The typical employer match today lands somewhere between 4 and 6% of your salary, and most plans require you to contribute somewhere around 6% of your own pay to unlock the full amount. Walk away from that and, over a full career, running the numbers at a reasonable market return, you're leaving something in the neighborhood of $300,000 on the table by the time you'd retire. $300,000. Not from the market being generous. From money your employer already agreed to pay you that you simply never claimed, because the request to claim it required an active decision you never got around to making. Companies that automatically enroll new employees into this see participation rates near 94%. Companies that leave it as something you have to opt into manually see participation closer to 64%. Same benefit, same math, same employer. The only variable is whether the person had to actively choose it or actively decline it. That gap right there. That's the entire argument for this whole video in one statistic. Put real numbers on it for a second. Say you're earning $65,000 and your company matches 50 cents on the dollar up to 6% of your pay. Contribute the full 6%. That's $3,900 a year out of your own paycheck. And your employer adds roughly $1,950 on top. Money that simply wasn't there a moment before you asked for it. Skip that, and you haven't just missed out on $1,950 this year. Compounded across a full career at a reasonable market return, that annual gift from your employer, left uncollected year after year, is where a figure in the hundreds of thousands quietly disappears. Nobody sends you a letter telling you that you left it on the table. It just never shows up, and most people never notice the absence of something they never saw arrive in the first place. Second stop, after the match is captured, is a small buffer. Not the full emergency fund everyone talks about, just enough that a flat tire or a vet bill doesn't knock you back. Into a credit card. This doesn't need to be dramatic. It needs to exist, and it needs to be somewhere slightly inconvenient to reach. Third stop, once that buffer exists, is the fuller emergency reserve and whatever medium-term goals you're funding. A house down payment, a wedding, whatever it is for you. And this is where the separate bank matters most, because the whole design depends on friction. It needs to take a real, deliberate step to move that money back, not one tap in an app you're already staring at 40 times a day. I want to be honest with you about the actual dollar difference this makes, because it's bigger than most people expect. Right now, the national average rate on a standard savings account is sitting well under 1%, while a solid high-yield account is paying somewhere around 4%. On $10,000 sitting in the wrong place for a year, that gap alone is a few $100s, money you did absolutely nothing to earn or lose except choose which bank held it. Stack that gap on top of the behavioral gap, the fact that money in an inconvenient separate bank tends to actually stay there. And you're looking at the difference between an account that grows for a decade and an account that resets to zero every 18 months, because life happened and it was sitting right there. The friction I keep mentioning isn't complicated, and it isn't punishment. It's just distance. When your savings sit at the same bank as your checking, moving money between them takes the same 3 taps you use to check your balance a dozen times a day. It's frictionless by design, because that bank wants your money moving, wherever it moves. A separate bank, one where you'd have to log in fresh, verify your identity, and wait a business day or two for a transfer to actually clear, introduces just enough of a pause that most impulse decisions don't survive it. Nobody cancels a concert ticket purchase because the money would technically be available in 3 days. You just buy it with the card in your checking account, and the money you'd redirected before you ever touched it stays exactly where you put it. That pause is the entire mechanism. It costs you nothing except a slightly longer wait on the rare occasion you genuinely need the money, and that trade is almost always worth it. I'll tell you honestly, I didn't always run my own money this way. Early on, I had exactly Marcus's setup, a same bank savings account, a transfer that happened after the fact, and a habit of treating that balance as a soft cushion rather than a hard wall. It took watching myself borrow from it 4 separate times in 1 year, always with a good reason in the moment, before I actually moved it to a bank I don't have a card for. The difference wasn't that I suddenly became a more disciplined person. I didn't. I just stopped negotiating with a version of myself who had access to the money. So here's exactly what to do this week. And I mean this week, not someday soon. Log into your payroll or HR portal. Most companies now run this through a system like Workday, ADP, or Gusto, and look for direct deposit settings. Almost every modern payroll system lets you split a single paycheck across more than one account, some as a fixed dollar amount, some as a percentage of each check. Percentage is usually the better choice because it scales automatically with a raise or a bonus, without you having to remember to go back in and adjust it. If your payroll system genuinely doesn't support a split, some older or smaller company systems don't, the fallback is an automatic transfer that fires on the same calendar day your paycheck lands, not 2 or 3 days later, because every day that money sits visible in your checking account is another day your brain has to register it as spendable before it's gone. Same day still isn't as strong as a true split at the source, but it closes most of the gap. If you're sitting there thinking your paycheck is too tight to redirect anything before you even touch it, I hear that. And I'm not going to pretend everyone has slack sitting in their budget waiting to be captured. But this is exactly where percentage-based splitting earns its keep, because you can start at 1%. 1% of a $65,000 salary is roughly $25 a paycheck. You will not notice $25 missing from a check you never saw a hole in the first place. What you will notice 18 months from now is that a habit exists that didn't exist before, and habits are far easier to scale up than they are to start from nothing. Move it to 2% after your next raise. Move it to 3% after the one after that. The number matters far less than the fact that the redirection point sits before the money reaches you, every single time, without requiring you to decide anything on payday morning ever again. Go set the split up before you close this app, even if it's small, even if it's 1%. Priya didn't start at the number she's at now either. Nobody does. She started at 3% of a smaller salary, 7 years ago, on a Tuesday afternoon on her lunch break, because a coworker mentioned offhand that she'd never actually seen her full paycheck land in checking in 4 years. That one offhand comment is the only reason she went looking for the setting in her HR portal at all. She wasn't chasing a number, she just found the idea strange enough to try it once. Marcus is still meaning to change his setup. He's told me that 3 times now, and I believe him every time, because I don't think he's lying to me or to himself. I think the setup he has genuinely feels close enough to working that there's never quite enough urgency to fix the one thing wrong with it. That's the trap inside this whole topic. A savings account that technically exists is so much better than no savings account at all that it's easy to mistake it for solved. The gap between Marcus and Priya isn't intelligence, and it isn't income. It's that one of them made the decision once, at the source, and never had to make it again, and the other one keeps making a version of the same decision, in the wrong place, every single Monday, and calling it progress because at least he's trying. I'm Faisal. Thank you for listening to Sheikh Faisal.